All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. I want to thank our shir sponsors. I thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Max and Randall Lepkowski, in honor of Yitzchak Meir's upcoming bar mitzvah. Dr. Riva Mitzner, in commemoration of the first yahrzeit of her father, Dr. Larry Schenk, Aryeh Ben Chaim, Jack Bennett, in memory of Sergeant Omer Taviv, who was killed on the Gaza border on May 12th, 2021. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. We also thank our week of learning sponsors, Shmuel and Shira Artman, in honor of the birth of a baby girl to Jesse and to Rivka Mayravitz. But with that, let us begin. A beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Chof Tes 29, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem at the Mishnah on Chof Ches Amud Beis 28b. So the Mishnah said as follows: Kol Shivas Hayamim. It's a very, very beautiful Mishnah. Kol Shivas Hayamim, Adam Ose Sukaso Keva Ubeso Arai. Here is the guiding light principle for Sukkah. What happens over the Yom Tov of Sukkah? For 7 days, a person makes his Sukkah his fixed dwelling and his home his temporary dwelling. Again, there will say now that we've seen this principle many times before, and this becomes the overwhelming guiding light principle for all of Sukkah. What's the essence of Sukkah? Sukkah is you transplant the activities of daily living from your home into the sukkah. How do you know what you have to do in your sukkah? Whatever would be part of your normal everyday life is exactly what you would transplant into the sukkah. During the year, my home is my diras kava. On Sukkot, my sukkah becomes my diras kava. My home is still there, but my home has the status of my diras sarai. Yardu gishan. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. What happens if you're in the sukkah and it rains? Me'emasai mutar lifnos. When is one permitted to go ahead and leave the sukkah? Misha tisrach hamikvah. So this is interesting. So we'll say, what I want to, well, okay. So literally translated, when mikveh is like a porridge, right? When your porridge goes bad, when there's so much rain that it ruins my food, that's when I'm permitted to go ahead and leave the sukkah. So we'll say this is actually very interesting because rain, we've learned about before the concept of mitztair. Right? If one is in a state of discomfort, the ability to leave the sukkah. What we established when we spoke about mitztair is that to a very large degree, mitztair is subjective. Right? It's subjective, meaning what makes you uncomfortable. I might be very sensitive to heat. So therefore, it's 80 degrees for me, it's too hot. So technically speaking, I can go inside. It's interesting over here that when it comes to rain, rain does not have a subjective shear. In other words, why don't you say if it rains, well, if it bothers you, you can't deal with it, and you go inside. No, when it comes to rain, there's an objective shear. And the objective shear is if it's enough rain to ruin your food. Mashalo. The Gemara says, Mashal ma'adarado, I'm sorry, to what can this be compared? To give a mashal to this, in other words, the mashal that the Gemara is dealing with over here is, what is the mashal like? What is it like when it rains on Sukkot? What could that be compared to? So Gemara says, Le'evet sheba limzo kos l'rabo. It could be compared to an evet, to a servant, who came to pour a cup of wine for his master, v'shafach lo kiton al panov. And ultimately, again, the master pours the pitcher in his face. So we'll discuss this mashal in just a little bit, but the idea that the Mishnah is highlighting is gishamim simin klala b'chag. That ultimately, again, the presence of rain is considered to be a sign of divine displeasure on Sukkot. And I will say now, I think it's very interesting. I saw that there's a beautiful Sfas Emes. The Sfas Emes says that dafka when it rains in the beginning of Sukkot. This is not a din ultimately in all of Sukkot. It's a din specifically on the first night of Sukkot. Where does he see that from? Because if you look at the lashon of the Mishnah is Mashal Ma'adav Doron LeEved Sheba. It's referring to the Evet first showing up. So the Sfas Emes, the Imre Emes all highlight the same idea, that Gishamim is only a siman klala. It's only considered to be a sign of divine displeasure when it's at the beginning of Yom Tov. And of course, the Svara also makes sense. Why? Because we've spoken about Gezeira Shava Tesvav tells me that the only time there's mitzvah d'oraisa to sit in the sukkah is when first night. First night. Okay. So we'll talk about that mashal a little bit more, Amir Hashem. Says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan, let's analyze. Kol shivas yomim adam oses sukkah keva ubeisa arai. For all 7 days, a person makes his sukkah, his fixed dwelling, and his home, his temporary dwelling, keitzad. So how exactly does this manifest itself? So hayulo kelim noim, person has nice utensils. What do you do with your nice utensils? Ma'alon l'sukkah, you bring your nice utensils into the sukkah. Matzos naos, matzos are literally like covers or linens. You have nice linens. Ma'alon l'sukkah, you bring them into the sukkah. Ochel v'shosa, u'metal v'sukkah, you eat, you drink, you spend your time in the sukkah. So menahani mili, from where do I know this? Well, it's actually very interesting because sometimes, right, the way we often think about it is because the sukkah is the hut, so we don't think about bringing nice utensils into the sukkah, right, or nice things into the sukkah. It's outdoors, it might rain. The Mishnah says, no, there's dafka in Inyan to bring your nice utensils into the sukkah in order to show that the sukkah is my diras keva. My sukkah is now my permanent dwelling, not my temporary one. The Gemara says, Minahani Milif, where do I know this? How do I know that there's a mitzvah to make my sukkah into my diras keva? The Tan Rabbanan, Teshvu ke'in taduru. Because we'll say the pasuk says Teshvu. The pasuk says Basukos Teshvu. So the fact that it says Teshvu, Chazal Darshan, what does it mean Teshvu? Sit in it the way you would live in it. In other words, that make the sukkah your dira. So whatever are the fixtures of your regular sukkah, or say whatever the fixtures of your regular home, bring those into the sukkah as well. Mikan Amru, from here they learn, again, Bryce just restates it. Kol shivas yamim ozdam oses sukkah keva ubeisa arai. A person makes his sukkah his permanent dwelling, his home is temporary dwelling. Again, Ketzad, what's an example of this? If a person had nice utensils, ma'alon sukkah, you bring them into the sukkah. Matzah nos, nice linens, tablecloths, other linens, bring them into the sukkah. Ma'alon sukkah. Ochel v'shose u'metayel b'sukkah. You should eat, you should drink. Metayel literally means to walk around. But of course, in this context, I guess if a person has a very large sukkah, meaning walking around. But the Ma'aseh L'Tal just means you spend time in your sukkah. Spend time in the sukkah. So listen to this, Rabbi, say, u'mishanin b'sukkah. Now, the Mishnah says, in addition to this, you should also go ahead and learn in the sukkah. Now, look at Rashi for just a moment. Mishanin b'sukkah. It's in the wide lines on the bottom, the third line, down from the beginning of the wide lines. Mishanin b'sukkah. Sover limudo, u'mechatcha al borov, la'amod, da'henu shmaisa da'amorai, usvara shaltame mishnah ubraisa. Ma tam zeh chayiv, v'zeh pater, zeh aser, v'zeh muter. So we'll see, here's what's interesting. Rashi says, Mishaninon does not just mean learning. Mishaninon means learning with analysis. In-depth learning, be'iyun learning. That you should do your be'iyun learning in the sukkah. So the Gemara says, really? Is that true? Va'ini, v'amarava, Rava said, mikra u'misna b'metalalasa. You could do Chumash and you could do Mishnah, or whatever, we'll call it Tanakh and Mishnah, in the Sukkah. Tanuye, u'tanuye, bar minital lasa. But when it comes to, now, Tanuye literally means like Gemara. When it comes to analysis of a topic ultimately, again, could be done outside of the Sukkah. So we'll say, this is actually very interesting. So what the Gemara here says, Rava says, is things that don't really require an incredible amount of concentration, you can do inside the sukkah. So Tanakh, Mishnah, pretty straightforward, you can do that inside of the Mishnah. Anything that requires a deeper analysis, you should do outside, you can do outside of the sukkah. And I will say, here's what's really fascinating. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Bar Mitalusa. So again, Tanuye, Rashi says is a Shas. Bar Mitalusa, Im Yirtzeh, de Mitztaer hu, u Mitztaer patra min ha-sukkah. He will say, listen to this. So Rava says, to try to concentrate on a complex piece of Gemara, or on a complex piece of learning in the sukkah, is very difficult. Because it's difficult, it's Mitztaer. Because it's Mitztaer, I'm patra from the sukkah. Now here's what's interesting. Rashi says, I always thought, I don't know why, I guess I never paid attention to this Rashi. I always thought that what Rava was saying is, therefore you could go ahead and go into the Beis Medrash. or you can go into your home, right, and go ahead and learn there. But in fact, Rashi says, "V'ha'avir yafelo laharchiv daito kasar." So let's listen to this. So sometimes Rashi says, if you have to concentrate on something, actually the best place to concentrate is under the open sky, is outside. Is outside, which is interesting because I think very often actually when you're outside, sometimes it feels like there's so many more distractions than anything else. But Rashi says sometimes when you need expansiveness of mind, you need being outdoors. Being outdoors is much more conducive. I should say, see this again in Chassidus, where there was such an emphasis on hisbodedus, on being alone with oneself. Often that time alone with oneself was spent outdoors. Right, underneath the sky, underneath the expansiveness of the world. So the point over here is, you see it, but the svara is fascinating. You see over here that not all learning has to be done in the sukkah. Simple things which don't require too much concentration should be done in the sukkah. Anything which requires greater concentration, greater analysis, can be done outside of the sukkah. So we have a contradiction to which the Gemara says, Lokasha, ha b'migras, ha be'iyune. Everything depends on how you're learning. Rashi says, Hala migras, kilomar trei gavni shinun, havu le migras, gimara haberura lo kvar, fainu shmaisa, tzarach sukkah, v'hainu mishanin, liyunibar mtlasa. Depends. So we'll say, if you're reviewing a piece of Gemara that you already know, or it's a Gemara that's a little bit more straightforward, do that in the sukkah. But if it's a piece of Torah which requires a bit more analysis, that can be done outside of the sukkah. And both said this is very important because this actually is quite fascinating because we know that, for example, we still learn in the base medrash on Sukkahs also, right? It's not like we go ahead and we move all, because it depends. Everything depends is whether or not I could concentrate on the particular limud in the sukkah or not. Of course, if I could concentrate, best to be in the sukkah. But just again, fascinatingly enough, if I can't concentrate, first of all, so listen to this, the inability to concentrate and to really chap a piece of Torah, that's mitzvah. That's painful, right? That's uncomfortable. If it's mitzvah, I'm potter from sukkah, and I can then go to learn wherever it is that learning will best be accomplished. If it's outdoors, it's outdoors. If it's my house, if it's the base medrash, wherever it's going to be. Incredible. What's that top of Chavtes? Kiha de Rava. In the Hagos, it changes this to Rava and Rami Bar Chama. Kihavu kaimi mikamei Rav Chisda. When they would be learning before Rav Chisda. Mirahati bigimara bahadi adadi. V'hadir ma'aini b'svarabo. So this is very interesting. So Rava and Rami Bar Chama had a very interesting approach to their learning. What they would do is when they were learning before Rav Chisda, the first thing they would do is they would run through the Gemara. And what does it mean to run through the Gemara? What it means is, Rashi says, Marati b'Gemara, Mashishamo mipiv, daraploni asar, daraploni mutter. The first thing they would do is, they would say, okay, let's just review what Rav Chisda said. In other words, let's get down facts. Did they understand the facts? Not yet. But first step is, let's get the information. After they got the information, then they went back again and analyzed it to try to understand the svaras, the intellectual underpinnings of it, which happens to be, if we think about it, a fascinating approach to learning, right? That sometimes the idea is get your information first, even if you don't fully chap why things are such, but get the information down clear, get it clear, and then afterwards go back and learn. So the Gemara is just illustrating this to show that there are different forms of learning, right? There's kind of like, there's a more panoramic view of learning where you're not necessarily engaging in svara, just clarification of facts, and then there's the engagement. So I will say, Rabbi Nachman had a very interesting approach to a very interesting derech halimud. The Rebbe said, he said, in the non-Hasidic circles, he said, in the more Litvisha circles, people could get stuck on a piece of Gemara for weeks. For weeks. So the Rebbe felt that was not the right approach to learning. He felt the right approach to learning was learn the sugya, try to understand it. If you can't understand it, do the best that you can, and then move on. Do you know what the Rebbe said? The Rebbe said, don't worry, you'll understand it the next time you go through Shas. That was the Rebbe's svara. Now the truth is it works well for Daf Yomi, but it's an interest. Again, I'm just pointing out in the world of learning, there are many different approaches ultimately to how to tackle a particular sugya. But it's always, so again, the idea being there's more, I'll call it like a more superficial learning, which doesn't require as much concentration. That's for the sukkah. Things that require more concentration, if you could do it on the sukkah, great. But if you can't, you have a license to go ahead and move elsewhere. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amar Rava. We'll say, so back to what has to come into the sukkah, what can't come into the sukkah. Mani mishasya, cups. Cups are glasses, right? Drinking glasses, rashes kosos, right? B'metal should come into the sukkah. Mani michla, now this is very interesting. Mani michla means plates after you have eaten. Bar mimtal lasa. Dirty dishes. I was about to say, dirty dishes should not remain in the sukkah. Very, very important yesod. So we're gonna build on this a little bit. So cups, so apparently, glasses, even after they're used, do not become something that is a bit repulsive. But dishes, after they've been used, you don't keep them in the sukkah. And again, we'll say, it's not a chiddush. Think about this. No one keeps a pile of dirty dishes on their dining room table. Right? What do? You clear the table. It's not until you clear the table. You don't keep the dirty dishes there. So in the sukkah, don't keep the dirty dishes in the table. The Gemara goes weiter. Chatzba b'shachil bar metalasa. So chatzba, Rashi says over here, is an earthenware vessel or an earthenware jug that they used to draw water. Shachil, Rashi says, is a bucket of wood or a wood bucket. Right? So these things ultimately, again, bar metalasa, should ultimately be kept outside of the sukkah. Sirbo said these were called more like general service utensils. So general service utensils should not come into the sukkah. Shraga metalasa. The shraga literally means a ner shel charis, Rashi says, is an earthenware lamp. An earthenware lamp ultimately could be in the sukkah. Some say you should only keep the earthenware lamp outside of the sukkah. V'lo pligi, it's not a contradiction. Ha b'sukkah gidola, ha b'sukkah kitana. One is a large sukkah, one is a small sukkah. In the large sukkah, so although the light of the earthenware lamp is discernible, the lamp itself is often not discernible. In a smaller sukkah, the utensil is more visible. And also we've seen this before. Earthenware lamps tend to get disgusting from the oil over time. So in a small sukkah, you wouldn't want to keep it there. In a large sukkah, you would want to keep it there. I will say, so again, the common denominator is that you don't keep unseemly utensils inside of the sukkah. This is incredibly important because where this comes up is you can't bring a garbage can into the sukkah. Can't bring a garbage can into the sukkah. Very important halacha that sometimes we forget because, we're outdoors, so we don't think about it. But you would not bring your garbage can into the sukkah. Why not? Because no one brings their garbage can into their dining room. Right? You don't go ahead and say, you're in the middle of a suda, you bring a garbage can into the dining room and start dumping things into the garbage can. You take it out because it's not bakavadik to have a garbage can into, in the dining room. So again, in the sukkah also, keep the garbage can outside of the sukkah, bring the garbage outside, but not into the sukkah. Same thing again with pots. With pots, Shulchan Aruch brings down, you can't bring pots into the sukkah. In other words, let me say it differently. When I say you can't bring pots, in other words, if let's say you have, people have, I don't know what the technical term is. Like the type of serving pieces where you could cook in it and serve in it, right? So that you can because you would bring that to your table. Essentially, whatever you would bring to your table, you could bring into your sukkah. But again, sometimes because, especially if sukkah is cold, the person wants to bring the pot of soup into the sukkah, serve it out of the pot. You can't do that in the sukkah. Anything you wouldn't do in your dining room, you don't do in your sukkah. No garbage cans, no what we'll call, cooking utensils, no piles of dirty dishes. Treat the sukkah like you would your home. Incredible. We'll say Yardu Gishanim. So remember again, the Mishnah said that if it rained on Sukkot, the Mishnah gives the mashal. The Mishnah gives the mashal to the servant, Shebalim Zalkos L'Rabba, who came to pour a glass of wine for his master. And what happens? V'shafach lo kiton al panav. And the master poured out the jug in front of him. So Yardu Gishamim. So Gemara says, Tana Misha Tisrach. I'm sorry, not yet. We're not up to the mashal. Sorry, if it rained, you're allowed to go into the home. You can leave the sukkah, go into the home. And the Gemara says, at what point in time is enough, but when is it enough rain that you could call it a day and go into the house? Ultimately, again, when your soup would get ruined, when your food would get ruined, Tana misha tisrach hamikva shagrisin. It's dafka talking about now. Again, as I mentioned, the Mishnah mikvah literally means a porridge. A porridge, grisin are beans, lentils or split beans. So Rashi points out over here that this is the type of food that is easily ruined. that is easily ruined. In other words, you don't need a lot of rain in order to go ahead and go into the house. It's at the point in time when your food would become ruined, that's when you're permitted to go ahead and leave. Abaye, Hava Kayasef Kamed Rav Yosef Metal Lasa. So listen to this. Abaye was sitting before Rav Yosef in the sukkah. Noshiv Zeka, the wind began to blow. The Kamaisi Tzivusa. And interestingly enough, they were like pieces of schach. Literally, tzivusa is literally splinters. Kirash says, kismin shal schach. There are pieces of schach that started falling into the food. So Amrulu Rav Yosef said, Panu limani mehacha. Pack up my stuff, I'm going back into my house. Amrulu Abaye says, really? That you're going into your house? V'hatnan mishatisrach hamikva. But we learned in the Mishnah that the only time you're allowed to go into the house is rain, and only enough rain if it ruins your food. Amarle ledidi kevan da'anina datoi kimisha tisrach hamikvadami. Me, I am a fastidious person, an istinis, right? Because I'm a fastidious person, therefore, again, for me, the little pieces of schach falling off, it's like rainfall. Now, both say we spoke about this before. I mentioned this just before in the Mishnah. That remember, this is the din of mitztair, and the din of mitztair is absolutely subjective. Absolutely subjective. So Rav Yosef is saying, listen, for me, schach falling down into my food is very disturbing. I can't deal with this. So for me, this is mitzvah. For me, this is the equivalent of rainfall that would ruin my food, and therefore I'm permitted to go inside the house. Tan Rabbanan, Haya Ochel b'sukkah v'yardu gishamim. It's a very interesting halacha. Haya Ochel b'sukkah v'yardu gishamim v'yarad. Let's say you're sitting in your sukkah. It began to rain. And now you left the sukkah. The lashon of yarad means you're going down. Means you're going out of the sukkah. Ein matrichin osolalos achig marsudaso. Both say this is a very lemaisa case, right? I'm sitting in my sukkah. It begins to rain. I leave the sukkah. I go back into the house. And then what happens? By the time I get settled, right, and I start to eat something, what happens? The sun is out. The birds are chirping. It's beautiful. The Gemara says, once you leave the sukkah, there is no obligation to go back until you finish the meal. In other words, you could finish it out in the house once you moved everything. Same idea. If you were sleeping in your sukkah, the yardu gishamim, and it began to rain, the yarad, and therefore you left your sukkah, ein matrichen osolalos ad sheyer. This is very interesting. You are not obligated to go back. We don't push him to go back into the sukkah. Ad sheyor. Now both say the Gemara says like this: Iboilahu ad sheyor or ad sheyor. Now both say, if you notice again, it's the same word. Just one is with an ayin, one is with an aleph, but they mean very different things. Ad sheyor with an ayin means until you wake up. Ad sheyer with an aleph is until it becomes light outside. So the Gemara is asking, so what are we saying? If I'm sleeping in my sukkah, it began to rain, I moved inside my home. So the Gemara says, we don't osolalos, you don't have to go back, ad sheyer. Does yer with an aleph mean that, again, I could sleep in my house until I wake up, whatever time I wake up, and then I'm obligated to go back into the sukkah, or with an S with an ayin, or ad sheyer with an aleph, that you can sleep inside your house until when? Until daybreak. But once daybreak comes, you have to go back into the sukkah. So Tashma, Ad Sheyer V'Ya'ala. So V'Ya'ala Amud HaShachar. So another brayso says Ad Sheyer, or until it becomes light, and Amud HaShachar. Alos HaShachar. Right? Dawn. Now both say, now those are two different times. Right? Dawn, what we call alos, is even before it becomes light outside. So tarti, how do you reconcile two different time frames? Ela'ima ad sheyer v'ya'ala amud hashachar. Rather, both say what it means is as follows, and this indeed is the halacha l'maisa, that if you were sleeping in your sukkah, and then left your sukkah because it was raining, and you went back to sleep inside, you are not obligated to go into the sukkah until two things happen. Until you wake up, and it's past daybreak, which means if you were to wake up and it's still nighttime, you don't have to go back into the sukkah even if the rain stopped. Or again, if you're sleeping past daybreak, there's no obligation to wake the person up so he can go back into the sukkah. And that is the halacha l'maisa. Supposed to say the Gemara goes right. So to what can this be compared? If it rains on Sukkot, remember again, the Mishnah said, like a servant who came to pour his master a glass of, I'm calling it wine, the Mishnah doesn't say wine, but he came to pour his master a glass of wine, and the master went ahead and poured out the jug. V'shafach lo kiton apanav, poured out the jug on his face. So the Gemara says, Ibai lehu, mi shafach lemi. Who poured out for who? She always said, I translated it as who poured out for who, but the Gemara says, when you look at the Mishnah, it's not clear who's doing the pouring. Right? It says, Mashal amad daradomeh, le'evet sheba limzo kos l'rabo, v'shafach lo kiton apanav. And he poured the jug on his, who poured? Who poured the wine out? So the Gemara says, Tashma, Desanya, Shafach lo rabo kiton alpanav. Right? It means that the master poured out the jug. Alpanav could mean, in front of him, in front of Amr lo, and he says to him, I'af shi b'shimu sheikh. I do not want your service. I'll tell you something interesting. This Gemara, this Mishnah, always bothered me tremendously. Because theologically, what do you do with that? Right? The idea that on Sukkot, if it rains, even if we go with the Sfas Emes, that this is the din on the first night, not necessarily a din in the rest of Sukkot. But how do you reconcile this? Yiddishkeit is all about optimism, and we come into Sukkot after Yamim Noraim, confident that we've been forgiven, confident that we've been absolved, confident that it's a new slate. And here you're telling me that if it rains on the first night of Sukkot, and I want to point out also, remember, Sukkot is also the beginning of what? The rainy season. Hey, so there's a little bit of a catch-20. It's true, we wait to start saying Mashurach Umur Agashem until the end of the Yom Tiv, but technically speaking, you should begin at the beginning of Sukkot, Mishnah and Tainus. You should begin at the beginning of Sukkot. So what do you do with this? So I saw, quoting the name of the Baal Shem Tov a long time ago, but I haven't been able to track it down since then, but I saw, quoting the name of the Baal Shem Tov, he gives a different approach to this. He says, Mashal Amad, when it rains on Sukkot, to what could this be compared? Listen to the way he reads the Mishnah. He says, Li eved sheba limzo kos l'rabo. It's compared to an eved who wants to pour a cup for his master. So the eved, why does the eved want to pour a cup for his master? Because he wants to demonstrate his fidelity, his servitude to his master. And what does the master do? V'shafach lo kiton alpanav. Alpanav doesn't have to mean on his face. Alpanav means in front of him. Why does the master pour out the pitcher? Says the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, the master pours out the pitcher because he's telling the servant, I don't need you to serve me. Come be with me. I don't need your servitude. I want your companionship. I don't need you to serve me as an eved. See, he pours out the cup. You're not my servant. You're not my servant. Let's spend time together, not as equals, because the master and the servant aren't equals, but let's spend time together in a state of companionship, in a state of togetherness. Because says the Baal Shem Tov, what's Sukkot? What's Sukkot? Here I just had Yamim Noraim, and Yamim Noraim is so overwhelming. And Yomim Noraim is all about, again, Melech HaKadosh. Everything is the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I make it through Yomim Noraim, and I establish a new level of companionship and spiritual intimacy with the Ribono Shel Olam, to the point that HaKadosh Baruch Hu invites me to leave my home and to enter into his home. The Sukkah, like we said, the Zohar says, the Sukkah is the Tzel Dehe Menusa, it's the shadow, it's the shade of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Ribono Shel Olam invites me in, ultimately, again, to go ahead and be with him. And sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that the relationship is so good, that the relationship is so beautiful, I don't even need you to leave the confines of your home to go ahead and be with me. We could be together in the comfort of your home as well. Mashal le'eved, it can be compared to a servant who wanted to show that he's the servant of the master, but the master loves the servant so much that he doesn't want him to exhibit servitude. So what does he do? Shafach lo kiton alpanav, he pours out the jug, don't serve me, just be with me. So Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh understands the polar opposite, right? So the Gemara, the Mishnah, framing rain on the first night of Yom Tov as the most intense display of divine displeasure. I don't want your service. And the Baal Shem Tov saying just the opposite. An incredible display of divine companionship, divine love, a willingness and a want of HaKadosh Baruch Hu not to deal with us as servants and a master, but as two entities who just want to spend time and want to be with one another. Incredible. The Gemara goes like to Tan Rabban. I'll both say first wide line. Now, just to understand the connection between the next sugyas, Rashi points out, once we spoke about kind of like omens, right? Or things that well, we'll call it omens. Even though again we don't really believe in omens, right? We have to be very careful with this. So once we started speaking about omens, the Gemara is going to speak about some other omens as well. So the Gemara says, "Bisman shachamaloka," when the sun is stricken, simin ra l'chol olam. Ultimately, again, this is a bad sign for the entire world. For the entire world. So again, this is when, if you look at Rashi says over here, Bizman Shacham Aloka, Mishum Da'iri Hacha B'simane Klala Nakatla. So the idea is that when the sun doesn't look its normal way, that's called the sun is stricken, ultimately, again, that is a siman, that is a sign that difficulties are going to come to the world. Why? What can this be compared to? The Melech Basar Badam Sha'asa Suda La'avada. It can be compared to a king who made a Su'uda for his servants, V'yaniach Panas, and he went there and he put a lantern by the Sukkah, by the Suda to give light. What happened? Ka'as aleim, as soon as the king gets angry at the people who are invited to the Suda, V'amr la'avdo tol panas mipneihem, v'oshiem v'mechoshech. Remove the lantern and let them sit in darkness. So too again, when the sun is stricken and therefore does not give off its same amount of light, that is a sign of divine displeasure as well. Tanya, Rabbi Meir Omer, Kolzman Shema Oros Lokin. Anytime that the Ma'oros, now I'll say, here's what's interesting. We're going to see this go back and forth a little bit, but Rashi is going to explain a little bit later on that the fact that it first spoke about the sun and then it spoke about the Ma'oros indicates to us that Shemesh means sun. Ma'oros, in this context, refers to moon and stars. Even though normally when you see Ma'oros refers to luminaries, the sun, the moon, the stars. Here, because the Gemara is splitting it up, it must be Shemesh is sun, Ma'oros is moon and stars. Because man Ma'oros lokin, simin ra, l'son ehem shal Yisrael. Whenever the moon and the stars are stricken, that is a bad sign. Ultimately, I will say for the enemies of Israel. The enemies of Israel is a euphemism for Jews who are sinning. Why? Now, literally what this means is because Jews suffer a lot. Now, look at Rashi. This is actually quite an amazing Rashi. It's the last narrow line of Rashi. Let's listen to this. Anytime suffering is visited upon the world, Klal Yisrael has to worry. Right? We have to worry. Velomar lo ba simin ze ela bishvilenu yoser mishar umos. We'll say this is an overwhelming Rashi. Rashi says whenever we see something terrible happening in the world, Klal Yisrael has to introspect and say, is this a reflection somehow, some way of our behavior? It's almost as if what's happening in the greater world, the Gemara is saying, is the litmus test, is the spiritual barometer for where Klal Yisrael is holding. Because unfortunately we know suffering is part of our national narrative. So the Gemara will say, it's an overwhelming Gemara. It's actually a very overwhelming Gemara, that when you see difficult things happening in the world, Klal Yisrael, as a nation, we have to do a cheshbon hanefesh and ask ourselves, is the Ribono Shel Olam trying to tell us something? Is he trying to convey something to us? Mashal, the Sofer Shavala Beis HaSefer. This can be compared, this is actually interesting, Mashal. This can be compared to a Sofer, it comes to the Beis HaSefer, which means a Rebbe. Rebbe comes to the yeshiva, to the school, Uritzua biyado, and he's holding his strap. Mi doeg, who amongst the students gets worried? Mi sheragel lilkos b'chol yom v'yom. The kid who gets hit every day when the Rebbe shows up with the strap, that's the kid who gets nervous, right? The kid who never gets hit, he doesn't, right? I see from the smiles, there are some of us who definitely understand this mashal. This is an old school mashal. So the idea being, and the nimshal is, Klal Yisrael, unfortunately, we get hit. We've gotten hit so much over the ages. So when the world gets hit, it's important for us to introspect. And I will say, if you think about it, it's really an incredible. There's a famous Maisa like this. Famous Maisa that one time Rav Kahaneman Zecher Tzadik Livracha went to fundraise for the Chafetz Chaim in South Africa, in Johannesburg. And when he came back, the Chafetz Chaim asked him. He said, "Tell me, what's the plight of the blacks in Johannesburg?" So Rav Kahaneman was like a little bit surprised, like, why is the Chafetz Chaim, don't you want to ask me how much money I raised? Right? Why run with the plight of the blacks in Johannesburg? And the Chafetz Chaim, again, this is the story that I've heard, Chafetz Chaim said, because if the blacks in Johannesburg are suffering, it means that the Jews of Radin need to do more. Which is an overwhelming maisa, that the Chafetz Chaim was saying that when things are broken in the world, we have to introspect, which is, if you think about it, like, it's an awesome, it's even overwhelming to think about it, because things are always broken in the world, right? There's no, things are always broken in the world. You open up the newspaper, or you read the news, wherever you catch your news, and it's like broken after broken after broken after broken after broken. And it's pretty overwhelming if then we're supposed to introspect and reflect on that, but that's our destiny. So the Gemara goes weiter. Tan Rabbanan, Bisman Shachamaloke, Simin Rala of Dekochavim. We'll say when the sun is stricken, that is a bad omen for Ovdei Kochavim, for idolaters. Levana Loke, when the moon is stricken, Simin Rala Salem Shal Yisrael. That's a bad sign, ultimately, again, for Jews who are sinning. Why? Why is the sun an omen for the Ovdei Kochavim and the moon is an omen for us? For the simple reason that Klal Yisrael, we count time by the moon, and the nations of the world use the sun. Therefore again, the sun reflects what's happening with the Umos Ha'olam, the moon reflects what's happening with us. Lo ke b'mizrach, if ultimately again, the sun is stricken in the east, Simin Rali Yoshvei Mizrach. That's a bad sign for those who live in the east. B'marav, if it's in the west, Simin Rali Yoshvei Marav. B'mtzarakia, what happens if the sun is stricken in the middle of the sky? Simin Rali Chala Olam Kulo. Ultimately, again, that is a bad omen for the entire world. Panav Domin Ladam. What happens if you have what do they call it? A blood sun, right? Oh, that's a blood moon. Okay, a very red sun. In other words, the sun is just very red. So ultimately, again, Cherev Ba Li Olam. That's a sign that war is going to come to the world. L'sak, what happens if it resembles a sackcloth? So it just means that, again, the sun doesn't have its normal shine. It's diminished like sackcloth. Chitze Ra'av Ba'in La'olam. That means the arrows of famine are going to come to the world. Be it Siyaso, Mimaheres Lavo. I'm sorry. I skipped the line. If it's both red and resembling the sackcloth, then that is a sign, ultimately, again, that war and famine are going to come to the world. So, if the sun is stricken while it's setting, that means that any misfortune is going to be delayed. So if the sun, unfortunately, is stricken when it's rising, ultimately, again, that's a sign that the misfortune is going to come faster. Others say chilaf advar, it's just the opposite. And whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishes a particular nation, he punishes their idolatrous gods with them. Shneimar ubechol Elohei Mitzrayim es shvatim. Ubizman sheYisrael osur etzono shel makom. So we'll say this is actually an incredible Gemara. So after you get through this whole thing regarding omens, all different kinds of omens, Bizman sheYisrael osur etzono shel makom. When we adhere to the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ein misyarin mikol elu. There is no need to be afraid of any of these things. Shneimar Ko Amar Hashem El derech hagoyim al talamdu umeosos hashamayim al techasu ki echasu hagoyim mehema. So the Kadosh Baruch Hu said, don't learn from the ways of the goyim, and from the signs of the heavens do not fear, for the nations of the world fear from these things. The Gemara Darshans, Ovdei kochavim yichasu ve'in Yisrael yichasu. Only the Ovdei Kochavim have to be fearful of these omens, which Rabbi say in general is an incredible yisod. That when a person ultimately is Osir Ritzono Shel Makom, when we have Dvekis, when we are connected to the Ribono Shel Olam, we are the Mala Min HaTeva. We literally, again, we are able to go ahead and rise above the natural order of the world. So the Gemara says, when do you have to worry about some of these things? When I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing in life. As an individual and as a klal. But when we are Osir Ritzono Shel Makom, when we are following the word, following the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we are l'mala min hateva. We rise above the natural order of the world and are therefore not at all confined by any of these realities. In general, we'll say, that's how is it that the Jew is able to defy reality as an individual and as a nation? Because we are davak b'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When I cling to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is not bound by any laws of nature, when I cling to Him, I too am able to transcend the natural order of the world as well. Incredible. Tan Rabbanon, Bishvil Arba Dvarim Chamaloka. The sun is stricken because of four things. Whereas we've just established that the luminescence of the sun is diminished as a sign of divine displeasure. So what type of averis caused this to occur? So the Gemara says, Av Bezdin Shemes Beinu Nispat Ka'alacha. When the Av Bezdin was like the ranking Torah sage, when he died and he was not eulogized appropriately. Now the Marsha, now it's interesting, by the way, before I get to the Marsha, Rashi says over here, B'shvil Daled Dvarim, it's 5 lines up from Rashi, in the end of Rashi, B'shvil Daled Dvarim, Lo Shamati Tam B'davar. Rashi says, I don't know the reason for these things. I don't know the reason. So I'll read you the list first. The Gemara says, the sun is stricken because of four things. Av Bezdin, right, head of the Jewish community, was not properly eulogized. Al Nara HaMe'urasa, Shetzaka Ba'ir Ve'imo Shiela, about a betrothed girl who was violated by someone else, and she called out in the city, and no one helped her. Al Mishkav Zachar, because of homosexuality. And ultimately, again, two brothers who were killed at the same time. So Rashi says, I don't know why these things dafka bring about this the diminishing of the power of the sun. The Marsha comments on this, I'll say. The Marsha comments on this, and the Marsha says, again, I'm not going to, you'll look at it on yourself inside, but the Marsha says that perhaps it's like this. The Av Bezdin is considered to be like the luminescent Torah personality of the generation, of the society. If he's not properly eulogized, that means there wasn't enough kavod given to him. So you did not give enough kavod to the sun, therefore you lose some of the luster of the sun. If you see a young woman being violated, and you do nothing about it. So in other words, like the sun is a parent. You see a wrong being perpetrated against a woman, against a person, and you do nothing about it. It was clear that something terrible was happening. You did not step in. The sun ultimately is stricken. What about Mishkav Zachar? Right? This is not our topic, especially with 8 minutes left in the shir. But I'll say, Klal Gadol in life is, we never stand in judgment of anyone. People have their lifestyle choices. People do what they're going to do, and that is between them and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That ultimately, we never stand in judgment of anyone, and it's our job to make anyone and everyone feel comfortable and feel parts of our community. We all have our issues. We all have our struggles. We all live with our inconsistencies. What does it mean then when the Gemara says that the sun is stricken because of Mishkav Zachar? Shabbos say there's a difference between accepting people for who they are and a society or a community saying something is inherently acceptable. Those are two different things. Those are two very different things. Accept people for who they are, what they do, versus saying this is okay, this is correct. And these are very fine lines and very, very difficult things to try to balance. Perhaps when the Gemara says Mishkav Zachar, the Gemara is talking about over here not judging individuals, but when a society accepts something just carte blanche as being moral or being okay or being acceptable, and so that they alter the fabric of society, that's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says you've changed the light, right? You've changed the dynamic. And again, I will say, these are conversations these are Dvarim Ha'omdim Berumo Shel Olam. Because again, not our topic, but especially in the Frum community, we have not adequately addressed how to make people feel included in the community with all their variety of lifestyle choices. And this is something that we have to think about. Again, not at 6:39 in the morning, but in Yirtzeh Hashem, Saeed, you'll write it down in our topics to address. I'm going to let Saeed address this one. I'm going to take them. I'm away. I'm away that week. And I will say, so again, I'm just pointing out that again, the Gemara is talking about over here, not acceptance of individuals All individuals have to be accepted, but there's a difference between accepting individuals versus, as a society, changing moral fabric. Balance of that, incredibly difficult. The Gemara goes weiter. We got to finish. The Gemara goes weiter. And the notion of two brothers losing their lives at the same time is such a dramatic loss, right? There's something so wrong when that happens that the shemesh, which is the fixture of shamayim, ultimately again has diminished as well. There are four things that the luminaries, so again this refers to the moon and the stars, are stricken. Al kosvei plaster, those who go ahead and write fraudulent documents. So we'll say this is literally fraudulent documents. You go ahead and you write a loan document in the name of someone who never borrowed money. Al mi'ide edu sheker, those who go ahead and testify falsely. Va'al magadli behema daka be'eretz Yisrael, those who raise small farm animals in Eretz Yisrael. We'll say we'll get to this sugya. You're not allowed to raise small farm animals in Eretz Yisrael because they graze wherever they want to, which leads to theft. Va'al kotetzei ilanos tovos, those who destroy perfectly good trees. We'll say the common denominator over here are people who engage in either theft or waste. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, if you're engaging in theft or waste, ultimately, again, the luminaries are impacted as well. So much to say, but no time. Because of four things, right? People's property is handed over to the monarchy. Those who hold on to paid-up loan documents. Well, say, you see, if you hold on to a paid-up loan document, that leaves open the possibility to what? To recollect fraudulently. Those who lend with interest, Amid Beis. See, I got this, right? We just have to finish the end of the parak, don't worry. And I will say, this is incredible. This is not referring to leaders. This is referring to balabatim, right? So when do balabatim lose their money? So the Gemara says, if they hold on to paid up documents, if they lend with interest, and if ultimately, again, they saw things that were being done wrong and didn't do something about it, ultimately, again, they lose their wealth because of that. Or they pledge money in public, but never actually pay their pledges. Never pay their pledges. So the Gemara says, ultimately, again, another idea. Because of four things, Notzin Timyon means literally go into oblivion. Right? So another four reasons why Balabatim lose their money. Al kovshei schar sachir. So we'll say this is very interesting. So kovshei schar is when you delay paying your employees. Right? Come back, Rashi says, come back tomorrow. Right? Come back the next day. If you delay paying your employees, you lose your money. Val oshkei schar sachir, or those, now we'll say, the difference between kovshei is, I tell my employee, I'm going to pay you. I just can't pay you today. Come back tomorrow. And I keep pushing him off. Oshkei sar sachir, or oskei schar sachir, is literally when I just deny payment. I'm not paying you. Va'al sheparkin ol me'al tzavareihen, v'nosten al chaverin. Both say this is incredible. Or those who go ahead and take the yoke of responsibility off their shoulders and place it on others. See, Ravo said this is incredible. If a person's a balabas and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving you money, he's giving you money to accomplish things with. And sometimes what happens is a person says, I'm too busy, right? I have this responsibility, that responsibility. You know what? I'm going to shift this onto someone else. No. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you wealth, he gives you wealth to accomplish things. And the more he gives you, the more you have to accomplish. So when a balabas is blessed with wealth, but doesn't use that wealth to accomplish things, we're talking about communally, but instead shifts the yoke of communal responsibility to others, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm taking back my wealth. Va'al gasas haruach. And ultimately arrogance. When a balabas has arrogance because he is wealthy, because he is financially successful, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, no, then you misunderstood the wealth. Then you think the wealth is you. You think the wealth is your efforts, but the wealth comes from me. The moment there's arrogance because of wealth, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes it back. Gasas ruach kineged kulam. And I will say the worst, this is incredible, of any of these infractions, worse than denying payment, worse than withholding payment, worse than shirking the yoke of communal responsibility if you have means to help, is arrogance. Because the moment a person is arrogant is the moment they think, Kochi va'otzem yadi asli esachai lazeh. Look what I've accomplished. When it comes to humility, the pasuk writes, Va'anavim yirshu aretz v'is'angu al rov shalom. It says ultimately again, the humble will ultimately inherit the world. So again, the Gemara telling us that Allah the more a person has, the goal is the more I have in life, the more humble I should become. Because the more I have, the more I recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done for me, the more I am indebted to the Ribono Shel Olam, and therefore the more humility I possess. Hadrun Allah, Hayoshein, I will say Mazel Tov. Tomorrow, it's very exciting. Now, we're going to get into the sugyas of Daled Minim, of the Kasher Daled Minim. We're going to learn the halachas, ultimately, again, of what makes the Daled Minim Kasher. We're going to start in Meretz Hashem with the parak of Lulav Hagazel. We'll get into Lulav and Meretz Hashem B'Shat Tov Mestachas tomorrow. Shkarach Abosai. Good.